Welcome to the #1 podcast covering Michigan State basketball. The Final Four is not on the schedule. Join Rod and me, Eric, as we dive deep into the Spartans to get you prepared for every game. Subscribe today for in-depth recruiting updates and fantastic interviews with today's important college basketball personalities like Robbie Hummel.
Thanks for having me. I have listened to your guys' podcast numerous times on drives throughout any Midwestern Big Ten city, so I am big fans of your guys' work.
Jay Billis.
And next time, hey, if anybody in Michigan wants a December tea time, call me. You wimps won't show up, but I'll be there. I'll be there and play in the cold. And Izzo will be in front of the fire with hot chocolate.
Coaches Thomas Kelly.
No problem. Glad to be back, man. Glad to be back.
Mike Garland.
You just can't sit there and trade twos for threes. You can't do it. You're going to lose. Coming down the stretch, you're going to lose.
And more. You won't find better coverage of Spartan hoops than you will get here. For both the casual and hardcore fan, come along as we take you for a green and white ride. Hey everybody, Eric alongside Rod here for a quick check-in on this year's Spartan team and my experiences at Moneyball. As many of you know, Moneyball is a Pro-Am tournament hosted in Holt that features all of the Michigan State players and other current and former pros and amateurs. This year there were a number of players from Central Michigan and University of Detroit Mercy and some Lansing Community College players and Grand Valley players. So before we begin, I just want to make a quick word of thanks to all of you who support the show. Obviously, you're what keep the engine going here. We appreciate your support, all the Patreon supporters at the Mateen Cleaves level, Bill Church, Brian O'Donnell, Michael Bosnick, Chad Hickey, Draymond Green supporters, Adam Walzak, Dan Rankin, James Benton, Jim L., David Brame, Paul Marsh, Scott Driscoll, and Daniel Dronach, and all the Scott Scowl supporters on Patreon, as well as those over on Substack, Rich Wengerheim, and Kenneth Cromet. If you appreciate what content we crank out and want to keep hearing more of it, make sure you continue to support the show at thefinalfourisnottheschedule.com/support. To reach necessary links, also for one-time gifts through Patreon and Venmo. PayPal and Venmo. All right, so Rod, I made it to Moneyball on Thursday, the 11th, and I had to go this year without my son because he just had his wisdom teeth out, which is a real problem for him because I don't know if you remember way back to when you had your wisdom teeth out, but you swell up quite a bit and you can't eat much but it was a big problem for him because, of course, he's going to Purdue soon, and he has to take a picture for his student ID. And so he's at the point where he couldn't even smile. He can't even move his mouth enough. So
wow.
I hope
he looks like really funny. I got mine taken out. It was probably 2 days before I left for law school. So I got mine out a little later.
Yeah.
So it's probably, or I guess it was 22.
Yeah, sure.
But it was not bad for me. Like I remember driving across the country with my stuff in a Ryder van, and I remember having to squirt. I imagine he's got
salt
water that he's got to squirt in. Yeah, I remember doing that, but I don't remember having. I guess I got really lucky. I don't remember a lot of pain. Don't remember a ton of swelling. I guess I got really lucky, but that's terrible.
It's actually kind of funny. He just looks like a chipmunk with a bunch of acorns in his mouth. Which maybe is an insult to chipmunks. They never get that swollen. The good thing for him though is, I mean, much like your experience, his Tylenol and ibuprofen had been fine for him. He didn't really even have to use the other medication. My other two have had it done. A little bit more of an adventure for them. They definitely got the swelling and. Anyway, and they had a little more pain. So we survived. So I had to go by myself to Moneyball. It was not as busy, pretty busy, but not quite as busy as it was the previous year. And I don't know if that's a reflection of, the ballyhoo of the last three players. I think there's a lot, top five rating for Michigan State.
It's hype, yeah.
I think there's a little bit more hype, but it could be the night too, right? I mean, it's hard to know for sure.
From what I've observed in videos, it looks to me like crowds have been not quite, they're solid, but not more normal. Whereas last year, I think was, I think the 2 years or 3 years, I guess, that have stuck, probably 3 years that have stuck out. The 2 years that Miles Bridges was playing in it, particularly the second one, because again, that was a hyped team. And then last year, and this one looks more like the other years that they've done it. So solid, but not the same level.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty accurate because this is my third time. Yeah, well, yeah, and this is my third time going.
The hype's not there this summer the way it was last summer. Now, I happen to think that the potential for this to actually be a better team is present. But, they got to prove that. And I think for more casual fans, it's easy. Well, they're not going to be in the preseason top 25, most likely. Nobody's talking about them as a Final Four candidate for next year right now. So I get it. There's reasons for that.
Yeah, and I think too the intrigue with Konkar and his dunking and stuff. I mean, that it's been sort of it's been seen, right? So
right.
That was certainly one of the highlights people were expecting to see when they went, and they got plenty of it.
Yeah, there's a difference between when you had Miles Bridges again the first summer before his freshman year. It was all of that. The same way Cohen Carr had that attention last year. The second year, I mean, it's impossible for me to know for sure, but I tend to think that the second year with Miles was more around the fact that he was now Miles Bridges All-American who opted to come back instead of going into the lottery, and the team was expected to have a shot to win the whole thing as opposed to just the dunking, whereas you're right. It's still impressive, but people have seen Colin Carr dunk now.
Yeah, it is still amazing. So I think the best way to do this is kind of go over the games that I saw, and I think that's probably the simplest. I got there a little bit late, so I missed
before you get into it. I assume you didn't see Jeremy Fears, right? Because he's only played one game, I believe.
Well, that's what I was going to tell you. So the players who weren't there, Fidler was not there, which I was really disappointed. I really wanted to see him. And I think he played on Tuesday night and scored 40-plus points or something, hitting from – I saw some of those clips and was hitting from midcourt. So I did not get to see him play. And I didn't get to see Booker play because Booker was there, but he just sat, and Fears played in his place. So I got to see Jeremy Fears play.
Okay.
So that was kind of nice too, and so that was a good thing. So anyway, that was you get what you get when you go there. I mean, overall, I got to see about everybody else play, which was kind of nice. I did miss the first half of the first game because there was it's like some sort of construction or something that was on the freeway. So I got to Holt a little late. It's a long drive because it's not right off the freeway, unfortunately. So anyway, so I saw the Snipes versus Goodfellows, which is the first game, which was the team of Sapala and Tang versus Cooper and Holloman, and their team had not won yet. So they ended up losing the game. And I thought, Trey looked like Trey. He didn't look any different. Looked comfortable and confident. And I think we talked about this last year too, that it is hard to get a good feel sometimes for offensive prowess, maybe because there's just not, there's not a lot of resistance oftentimes with shots. And so, it's easy to get to the
often NBA All-Star game kind of defense.
Yes, it is not hard getting to the rim.
Exhibition. It's and so that makes it as you say difficult to evaluate. I do think as a general, as good a point as any to insert this, I think as a general statement, you can say, well, you can't take much from Moneyball, and of course, I mean that's so obvious as to not even be worth saying at this point. But the operative word there is much, not anything. And I do think there are some things that you can see at Moneyball that might end up mattering in the season. And they both have to do with offense. I think that there are times you can see, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when you get to Jaden Akins, you can see if someone's done some work on their handle.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, it's not an ultimate test because they're getting Moneyball defense, not Big Ten defense. But you can still tell if a guy's handle looks more confident, looks more together. And then the other thing is shooting. Now, I know that I say that, and the chorus of Captain Obvious is, oh, what about Russell Bird? Okay, yeah. The fact is, most of the time when you've had guys who have gone off in Moneyball shooting and quotes around gone off. One of two things is, well, the biggest thing is usually they've tended to be high volume guys. They're putting up a lot of shots. And if you look at the percentages they shot, they're not necessarily that impressive.
Right.
But it's erroneous to state that there's never been a point that you could see improvement from someone as a shooter. Now, let's talk about the first guy you mentioned, Trey Holloman. Last year, Trey Holloman was coming off a freshman season in which he didn't take a lot of shots, period, and he didn't take a ton of threes. And coming out of high school as a recruit, perimeter shooting it wasn't as if he was tum-tum Nairn, but that was a knock on him. That was something that needed to be improved. And my recollection of reports from Moneyball last summer were that he was looking much more confident with his shot. And what did we see when the regular season started? We saw a guy who shot 40% plus on decent volume. The all-timer in this category, in my opinion, is Kenny Goins. Kenny Goins absolutely first, at least in a public setting, so we're not talking about MSU practice, first displayed that he was legitimately going to be a three-point threat in Moneyball before his senior year. And as people remember, he hit one of the most significant three-point shots in MSU basketball history later that following season to beat Duke in the Elite Eight. So you can cite examples where guys have shown some clearly evident improvement in certain areas. Those would be about the only two areas I would take ultra seriously out of this. Other than the fact that I think it's good to see new guys just to get a feel for how they stylistically, how they might look to play, and the things they can do in terms of their ball skills. But basically, that's it. But that's not nothing. So the reflexive can't tell anything from Moneyball stuff is not really entirely true. There's a little, and I'm saying this just to try to correct the record a little bit, because you get to these reflexive, holistic statements that just don't bear up under scrutiny. So we try to get to the truth here.
And I guess the other thing that you didn't mention, which I know we've talked about before too, you can obviously see someone's body. I mean, you can see, for freshmen,
that too. Good point.
Are they big? Are they small? Can they
Good
can they
point.
move? How are they tall? Are they short? Is he listed as 6'6"?
Absolutely.
And he's like 6'4"?
And when you mention body, it's most evident when guys, and we see this a lot in the Michigan State program, when guys change their body. So I know you mentioned you didn't get to see X, but I've seen enough clips of him, and there's been enough talk about it. The word is he's up a little bit over 240.
Right.
And it looks like it in the footage that I've seen. So that's obvious. Jackson Kohler, it looks, I don't know. We'll talk about, I guess we can talk about him when we get to him, any further changes in his body. But last summer, it was very noticeable that he had done some work on his body between the end of his freshman season and Moneyball. So just over a couple months.
Yes.
And I think we also saw last summer Carson Cooper look bigger in his upper body. So that's a good point. That's the other thing you definitely can get a read on in Moneyball is physical changes. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, so I guess you look at the first team, that team snipes with Holloman and Cooper. I'll start by saying I never saw great shooting the entire time I watched. It was not a great shooting night by anybody. So I feel like come away the previous years thinking, well, this guy can really shoot. Because I remember even the freshman year we were talking, I thought Holloman looked pretty good. His shot looked good, even though the reports are that he didn't look very good. And he didn't shoot great this freshman year on very, very low volume. But clearly the shot, like the mechanics were there. He just needed the confidence. And he had that the sophomore year. But he looked like he knew what he was, when he was shooting, he didn't look like it was an awkward out there.
Right.
So anyway, but I would say that I didn't see anybody this night. And I'll just preface it by saying nobody looked great shooting. I didn't think, like you're like, whoa, you're wowed. So there's that. And maybe it's because it's Thursday versus Tuesday and players are more tired than practices through the week. I'm not sure.
I would,
who knows?
I would say this. I did, and of course you saw it, so I take that at face value. They didn't have a good shooting night, but I think as a team, this team, and it's something we haven't really gone in depth yet, obviously, as to Michigan State for next season, but I do think this. I think one of the things we're going to be talking about is this team has a chance to be, I think, an exceptional jump shooting group.
Yes.
I really do. And I say that because there's more balance. Again, potentially. They got to go out and do it, you know. But you've added some guys. Fidler, obviously, people have talked about it. He's hitting shots from just inside half court.
Yeah.
At Moneyball. Now, I don't expect to see that kind of shot selection.
Not if you want to stay on the floor.
Of November. But he's been a competent jump shooter in his career at Omaha, and perhaps he's got another level to his game. I mean, you do see that. A guy like Dalton Connect, who he gets occasional comparisons to, if my recollection is correct, he was kind of like Fidler, good shooter, not a spectacular one, like a mid-30s guy before he got to Tennessee, and then he clearly went up a level. So it's possible that Fidler is that. MSU has Jade Naked's return, who was kind of up and down last season, but Jaden's a proven shooter. We know that there's a reasonable chance he's at least a high 30s guy, and maybe better than that. Trey Holloman was a plus 40% guy last year, so he's demonstrated that. But then you start talking about, again, Fidler is a new guy, but you start talking about these other pieces. Xavier Booker, I believe, shot 33% as a freshman.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I think there are good odds he's going to be better, and there are great odds that it's going to be a much higher volume. That difference alone, Xavier Booker is going to be a much higher volume three-point shooter than Malik Hall was. Just a
almost
fact.
For sure.
That's how it's going to be. You wonder about Jackson Kohler. Is Jackson Kohler going to be more comfortable shooting threes this year? Possibly. We know he has it in him, and it's been talked about now for the last 2 summers. We'll see. We'll see how that goes, but that's a possibility. We just talked to. As we're recording this, I don't think the episode has aired yet, but we just talked to Zapata.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he talked about and I've seen footage of him taking jumpers. He talked about the fact that Michigan State has talked to him and is intending that he be something of a pick and pop guy. Does that extend all the way out to the line? I don't know, but we'll see. And then you look at some of the other players Michigan State is adding. Garrett Norman, kind of a forgotten man because he redshirted. Shooting is the biggest strength in his game, or was coming out of high school. I expect we are going to see him get opportunities. The 2 freshman guards, Kerr Tang and Jace Richardson, particularly Tang, is a big-time shooter coming out of high school. And Jace Richardson's a good shooter, too. Maybe not on quite the same level as Tang as a jump shooter, but both those guys are going to help. And then you have Jeremy Fears, and that was an area that Jeremy needed to work on. But I think there's reason to suspect that he may be improved. So all of a sudden, last year's team ended. It was a huge problem early, and then it all kind of sorted out in the wash, so to speak, with MSU as a three-point shooting group. By the end of the year, they were pretty good. But this is a potentially, and I'm going to lean on that word, but potentially a team with many more weapons. You've got more guys than last year's group who could be legitimate shooting threats. And I think that's going to be an important thing for this Michigan State group. I think they're going to need that. I think they're going to need to shoot the ball reasonably well and be getting production from a lot of different guys in that area. But I think they've got a chance to do that. So anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree with all those points. I think that's well said. So I guess, my impression from Holloman and Cooper, from a body standpoint, they looked pretty similar before. They looked good shape. I mean, I don't think Holloman looked any bigger or smaller. I mean, he just looked more confident.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect his body to change much. I don't think he's where he needs to be.
Yeah, I think so too. Probably, one of those things, you get a shirt off, he looks probably more muscular than he did last year is my guess. But it's probably not a massive change.
Yeah.
And as far as Cooper goes, moved pretty well. I thought his handle's pretty good. He actually hit a 3. I think he only took 1. He had a number of he played well. And then
okay, so you mentioned a 3. Did you see him taking mid-range shots? It was mainly off rebounds and
I think he had maybe an alley-oop or something like that. He had a couple of those, but you get a lot more of those in Moneyball than you get normal game, obviously, because you're playing defense.
Any jump hooks?
Yeah, he tried one and he missed from somewhere. I can't remember where, but not very far out. I think it was a jump hook. I can't remember now. But he didn't look a whole lot different to me. He was moving well, but he looked just more confident.
That I would expect.
Yeah. So anyway,
I think that with Carson, I'll say this. I think he could be a contributor in the way that this team needs him to be. And I'm sure there are going to be a lot of listeners that don't like hearing me say this or disagree with me, but I'm reasonably convinced of it. I think he could be a contributor in the way Michigan State needs him to be, more or less as the guy he was last year. With one caveat to that. I do think that he has in him the ability to be a guy who give you a little bit of offensive production just on dives to the rim. Now, people talk about the hands. I don't think his hands are particularly bad. I want to see him playing with a different point guard. Let's put it that way.
Yep, I think
and I think that he has it in him. You've seen him do it on occasion, but I think there's more of that in him. I would love to be surprised, and I'm rooting for him to make me look like an idiot for saying this, but I don't necessarily expect that we're ever going to see him be much of a face-up threat or even necessarily a post-up threat. But you know what? Xavier Tillman wasn't really great in those areas. He got a little better as a face-up guy in his last year. But basically most of his production as one of the better bigs Tom Izzo has had was doing exactly what I described, kind of a dive man, the roll man off pick and roll. But he was playing with an exceptional point guard who really clicked with him. I want to see Carson Cooper playing with different point guards than he was last year. But yeah, I'm not looking for explosive scoring growth out of Carson. I think he helps Michigan State as a defender and a rebounder. Those things are not going to change. They're still going to be there, and he's still going to have a role because of that, in my opinion.
Yeah, and so then the other team was the one that ended up beating them. It was Sabala and Teng. I would say at least the part that I watched, which is, again, very, very end of the first half and the entire second half, Kurt Teng didn't do a whole lot. There were a couple times he tried to isolate, and he has a pretty good mid-range game. I mean, I think that we knew that coming in, but it was definitely, he's got a pretty good handle, and he never attacked the basket much that I recall. He kind of would get into about 8-10 feet and then shoot from there, but it looked pretty good, and his body's pretty good too. He doesn't look like he's undersized, so I think he should be able to play in the Big Ten. Should be
no
fine.
No question. That was the word on him. Physically ready to go, game-wise ready to go. The same people have, it sounds like you didn't see much of it, but look, he's got a track record. He was statistically last AAU season, so a year ago. He was statistically one of the best three-point shooters in the country. He was a high 40s guy from three on good volume. He also has a mid-range game, as you mentioned. But I think those things combined with what you just said about his body and what I've heard about his grasp of defensive concepts, I am going to be absolutely floored if he is not playing a very consistent role right from the beginning for Michigan State. Now, how big that role is going to be remains to be seen because, Michigan State has two wings who are seniors, Jaden Akins and Frankie Fidler. So those guys are going to play a lot, and they should. But I struggle to imagine a world right now where Kurt Tang is not playing double-digit minutes somehow.
Yeah.
I think likely he gives you too much to not do that.
There are 200 minutes in the game, and there's in some ways, Michigan State is a lot of riches, right? Like, they have a lot of people who you think you could see ways of contributing, and they're just, there are only so many minutes to play. And that's a good problem to have because, there may be people in slumps or injured or whatever. And so they've got some depth, which is nice.
Michigan State's got 5 newcomers, right? 2 transfers and 3 freshmen.
Correct.
Kurt Tang, to me, is the guy likeliest to be second in terms of the size of his role of that group. Fidler's obviously going to be first, assuming health. But Kurt Tang would be the next guy in that line, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, then finally, Shimon Sapala, who's the late add to add some depth at the center position, seemed good. He's good size. He seems to get along with everybody. I think he took an outside shot or 2, and I don't think he made them that I recall. But seems to be he's able to bang in there and get some rebounds. He doesn't seem like chiseled, but he can move just fine. Like he could handle the ball okay. Like he wasn't totally hopeless with the basketball. So I think he'll be a useful depth player and somebody who, with his experience should be able to be helpful at times.
I'm going to be fascinated to see how that sorts out what his role is because once again you've got 3 guys at the 5. Now there's talk and suspicion that Jackson Kohler may play some 4. Okay, but if he's playing 4, where's Cohen Carr's role coming from? I think it's going to be very interesting, and you can see how these guys, to some extent, their roles are maybe interrelated with each other. You don't think about Cohen Carr and Zapata as affecting each other, but there's some domino effect going on, I think. Look, they brought him in for a reason. Obviously, the most readily apparent one is just, you'd like to have some depth, some legitimate size, both in case of injury and, given nights where you might have foul trouble. There's no more Zach Eady, thank God, but there are going to be other big men in this league who you might be grateful to have the option of 15 fouls.
Right.
And so there's that at a minimum. Beyond that, I just, we can't speak to it yet. I think that the thought was coming in, he's maybe a little better as a post scorer than the other guys they've got. I mean, Jackson Kohler has the potential to be a great post scorer, but we haven't seen him actually make good on that yet. Zapata is somewhat proven in that regard. But yeah, to me, it's an open question, and I don't think we're going to get good answers on that till November.
Yeah,
as to what exactly his role is going to be.
I think that's completely accurate. We'll move on to the second game in just a moment. Just I don't know what it feels like to you, but this has been like one of the wettest summers we've had in a long time. And so obviously I talk about gutters, the brothers just your gutters, but I am so thankful that I have that they put in my gutters because we've just had monsoons that feel like get like 2 inches at a time. It's just crazy. And so make sure if you're
lake effect. It has not been that way over here.
Well, and I think the hurricane effect is a little bit down in Texas, and we've had some big storms from that. And anyway, it just felt like just a wet summer. Just every year's different. So this has been one of those wet ones. And anyway, so you make sure that you've got things taken care of at your house because that causes all kinds of problems. The Brothers Adjust Your Gutters are the go-to choice of any smart person. They're going to have them take care of. They can replace them, they repair them, they can clean them out, they can put leaf guards on, whatever you need done. You get a percentage off. You just go on and mention Final Four when you get your estimate, either the west side or the east side of the state. You can't go wrong. So you find that on their support page to get links to get the estimate at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support. So the second game was interesting in that it was Fidler and McCullough's team. So it was, Fidler, like I said, didn't play. And so it was just McCullough as far as Michigan State players. And I don't think there's any question that Fidler was the best player on that team. And so they struggled. They played Garrick Normand and Jackson Kohler's team, who are undefeated. They also have the Hetty, I think is how you pronounce it, the Hetty brothers from Central Michigan, who are pretty good players as well. And they were, it was a slaughter. The one thing that I would say about that is, and I don't know if this is a reflection of Normand, and my impression is a little bit because, in our conversation with him before, he's a kid who's super competitive, but just loves competing really hard all the time. And I remember that last year he was playing hard every play. He didn't take a play off, offensive or defensive side. And I think that's his entire team was. They're pressing. They were full court press half the game. They were up 30 points at one point. They were just.
Oh, they must. Every other team must hate that.
Yeah,
They're doing
I think so.
That. Nobody wants full court pressure.
No, they had probably 20 steals. it was just crazy because they're so. Anyway, so they just destroyed the other the McCullough's team. I think maybe they got down to 15 in the second half at some point. So it was kind of boring, but it was interesting just that they played so hard. So anyway, McCullough looked pretty good. I think it's questionable, what his role is, and I've heard rumors that maybe he might get redshirted. We'll see.
Yeah,
he didn't show anything spectacular, but I thought he had a pretty good handle. He brought the ball up once, maybe or twice, and seemed to be able to move around okay. And he mainly just shot inside. I don't think he did anything outside, but good rebounder and he has enough size. I think that he would not get totally wiped out if he played in the Big Ten. So he could be, ultra depth at the 5 spot. I don't envision seeing him play the 4 until his shot's probably more there, but
well,
that's just my impression of him.
That's the talk on him though, is that he's got the capability, and I've seen him do it in AAU, that he's got long range shooting capability. Now, is it consistent enough to where you'd be comfortable with him hoisting a lot of shots in a Big Ten game? Maybe not.
Yeah.
But I think he's a very interesting guy. You didn't know, there's with big men especially, it's always an open question. How ready are they when they come in? And you never, I maintain, outside of guys who are truly elite, which you can count usually any year on one hand, you never know for sure with a freshman big where they're going to be. We've seen it at Michigan State. We've seen highly rated guys that struggled. Madi Sissoko was that. Going back a ways, somebody like Tom Herzog never really got it, but struggled immediately, even though he was a top 50 guy. And then you've had other guys. Xavier Tillman, as a freshman, pretty much ready to go. Definitely by the midpoint of his freshman season, was ready to go. Derek Nix, who a ton of people had questions about. Why did they offer him? He weighs 400 pounds, all that stuff. Derek Nix was starting as a freshman.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying he was a world beater as a freshman, but he was ready to contribute. So you never can tell for sure. And I had some hope that maybe McCullough was going to surprise a bit as a freshman and maybe actually be able to help. From what I've heard, and it's not just Moneyball reports, but other stuff people have talked to, I think it's unlikely that Jesse's going to play a big role as a freshman. You never know for sure. It's still early, believe it or not. But I'm still intrigued by him longer term because I do think he has the ability to stretch the floor. He's got legitimate size and probably will be able to hone his body, maybe add some good weight, reshape, move some other weight around. And I think he's got the potential to be interesting defensively too. I saw some things when he played AAU that I liked in terms of his shot blocking. I think he could be someone who helps as a rim protector. And in the modern game, you could always use that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot yet to prove in a combat. I've heard the same redshirting things that you've mentioned, but a name to watch, barring something unforeseen, probably not a huge role this year.
Yeah, and I think he may be one of those players where if you had to play him, you'd be okay playing him, but he may be just more depth at this point. And but I don't think you just get annihilated with him playing in the game. That's my thought. I do. Yeah, right. So moving to the team with Normand and Kohler. Again, Normand, not afraid to shoot. He's all over the place, and it just seems to have a blast just playing in general. Kind of goofy guy, but he. I thought he shot pretty well. It wasn't like lights out, like amazing, and he looked pretty much like he did last year. From a body standpoint, he looked a little bigger, not a ton to me. He looked pretty much the same, but
I wouldn't expect him to be like hugely different physically because he's an athletic wing, and so you want to be careful.
Yeah,
how much you alter a body to change that, But look, he's one of the under the radar most interesting guys on the roster to me because, he's been in the program for a year, and he came in with some definite strengths, namely shooting. But I think he's got more. I don't think he's just a spot up shooter. I think he really does have the potential to be a multi-level scorer. It's just a question of how quickly that stuff comes. But then the bigger question is at the other end. And I think what led to him not having a role last season was the defensive side. And so you're not going to see it in Moneyball, obviously. No. It's going to be something we'll find out in November. But how many strides, how big are the strides that he's taken on the defensive end? I do think potentially he could be pretty good there because he's got a nice mix of size and athletic ability. And you mentioned his mentality. That always helps too.
Yep.
To have that kind of approach. But it'll be interesting to see where he's at. I think he's a guy who they got a lot of bodies, a lot of depth, and a lot of mouths to feed, so to speak. So it's hard to know where he slots into that rotation, but I'm not going to be surprised if he maybe plays a little bit bigger role than people are expecting. We'll just have to see.
Yeah. Well, I think he could be sort of like Trey Holloman, where you can't envision how he's going to get minutes on the floor. Then you're like, well, how could he not be on the floor, right? I mean, you never know, right?
A good comparison. Yeah, we have to see how his development has gone, But I think he's got a chance. I think he had a lot of material, a lot of potential coming in.
So the next one, of course, is Jackson Kohler, who scored, I don't know, maybe like 80 points in the game. I'm not quite sure how many points. He probably more like
if there 40. Was a Hall of Fame for Moneyball, I think Jackson Kohler would be a first ballot inductee.
Yeah, and it's not like he's sitting there jacking up threes. So he just, he just scores a lot in the sense that he gets lots of around the basket. Good post moves, as we've all seen, that creative footwork. It's still there. He can. I thought his command handling the ball was really good. I was very impressed. He brought up the court a number of times, all the way. So, he can do kind of everything, and it'll be, of course, coming down to whether he can do it this year and whether he stays healthy. And I do think that injury really, really set him back quite a bit.
Sure.
And
it went on longer. It went on longer than I think people expected based on early returns. Like when it happened, I don't think people were envisioning, well, it's not going to be until after New Year that he sees the floor. I think the original thought was he would get back sooner than that. If you remember, we were talking
Christmas
about
or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Is he back for Indiana State? Is he back the game before the Christmas break? And none of that happened. Those were big weeks. I mean, when you're talking about another 3-4 weeks off, that matters.
Yeah.
And so, fair enough. I mean, I think I'm certainly inclined to give him a mulligan for last season, but I'll say this. The mantra of the last 2 years with Jackson Kohler has been, well, what could he do defensively? And I still think that's true, but I'm just speaking for myself. it's no longer the most important thing to me with Jackson Kohler. Because I saw enough. Actually, I thought the one thing that he showed last year when he did start playing is that the talk about him making some strides defensively was real.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he was Xavier Tillman or Andre Hudson, but he was better than he was as a freshman. You could see the impact of his reshaping his body, his conditioning, as that started to come back. I think he showed he's got the potential to be passable. To me now, we're back to the other side of the court. Jackson Kohler was brought in as a guy who could score. That was the word on him. That was the expectation. He's got those post moves. He's got a jump shot. He has some ball skills. All of that's there, right? We have not yet seen that show up other than in teasing fashion.
Yeah, a segment or something. Yeah.
And we've seen a lot of occasions where his footwork leads to him getting great shot opportunities around the rim that he doesn't convert. That has to change. It's now or never time for him, I think, because he's going into his junior year. So this is really it. Either he carves out a consistent role at Michigan State, or that doesn't happen, and he's probably not here next year. That would be my read. So this is kind of it. And I think now what is going to be the biggest factor in making that happen or not is whether he's actually able to start converting those plays, whether he's able to start making good on the word, oh, yeah, he can hit threes, he can hit 15-foot jumpers. Well, we've got to see it. We've seen flashes. We haven't seen anything consistently. So I expect that at the start of the year, there's a reasonably good chance that Jackson Kohler is your starting five. Does he hold on to that job? Does he make good on it? We'll see. But again, big year for him, and it's big for Michigan State because if he can become a guy that, again, you don't need him to be an All-American. If Jackson Kohler could be a guy that you could count on for, say, 8 and 5 in, 18 minutes a night, something like that, that would be huge.
Yeah.
That would be a huge, huge, huge development for Michigan State,
Yep,
and I think
so
he
too.
could. I think he's got a chance, but he's got to actually do it.
Yep. And I think I like about him too is right now, it's certainly Moneyball, but he's not afraid to get into people with his body on the offensive end, which, we have not seen that so much from the center position with Madi Sissoko, who is always trying to avoid contact in some ways to get a shot. So
the one, that you're right about that. And the other thing I do like about Jackson is one of those guys, and it doesn't get talked about enough. He has a knack, as an offensive rebounder.
Yep.
There are some guys who just have an innate sense for where the ball's going to go. And you know it when you see it. Dennis Rodman was the all-timer. I'm not saying he's Dennis Rodman, but by any means.
Yeah.
But Jackson Kohler does have a little bit of that knack, especially as an offensive rebounder, and that's something Michigan State could really use.
Yeah, they definitely could use something to clean the glass for sure.
Better getting second chance opportunities and converting them.
Yep. Well, if you need your glass cleaned and you need those converted here, make sure you head on over to the Swedish Squad of Grand Rapids. If you're on the west side of the state, they can take care of things, wash those windows that are grimy and, they've been water spots or dirt or whatever it is that's, bird droppings, all the things that get on your windows. So they can come out and take care of that. They'll do the inside, the outside, the windows, whatever you need done, even power washing your house. You can get 15% off. You mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate and you find that at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support under support page. Moving on to the last game, which I saw the first half and maybe a little bit, and then I just wanted to get home. So it was Akins and Fears playing against Carr and Richardson. So start first with, I guess, the freshman Richardson. He has a little bit baby face, but can move pretty well. He's very athletic. He can get up and he can dunk if he needs to. I mean, he's got some moves. He shot quite a bit and was pretty good. Overall, I thought he he looked really good. I mean, it is interesting, watching this, you can definitely pick out the D1 players versus the non-D1 players very quickly.
Sure.
Certainly the guys who are old, who get the gray hair, but for the most part, these, there's no question that these are superior players, not only in size, but also in just their quickness and all the other kind of aspects. But from a body standpoint, he also it does not look like he's going to get overwhelmed in the Big Ten either. That's just my impression. So I think he could hold his own, and it's reasonable to think that he might get some minutes out there. Certainly could hit the ball really well. And so I think, thinking of him as a third option, maybe as a point guard, it seems totally reasonable to me.
Yeah, and I think the nice thing about him is, much like Trey Holloman, I think he can help you on or off the ball. I'm with you. I think he's got to play. I just don't know how big the role is, and we're we're talking about a lot of guys. I mean, there are 4 guys who all seem capable of playing a reserve role in MSU's perimeter group, and that's without counting Cohen Carr as a wing.
The positionless player right now, kind of in some ways.
So it's going to be difficult, but I'm with you. Look, I think that Payne and Richardson are more prepared to play early minutes than Michigan State's freshmen were a year ago, with the exception of Jeremy Fears. Jeremy Fears was the one guy who was, I think, obviously ready to go from day one. I really like Jace Richardson. I think Jace Richardson has a chance to be a very, very good player at Michigan State because he can do a lot of different things. He can run an offense. I'm not going to say he's a great shooter yet, but I think he's a good one. And with upside potential for sure. He's a guy who could be a 3-level scorer. I think he has that in him. Physically, as you said, he looks ready to go. I think he's got defensive potential. Athletically, he's not a huge guy. He's about 6'2", but he's athletic. Not as athletic as his dad, but he's athletic. So there's a lot to like. And the only question I've got is how many minutes are there for him as a freshman, but I think he's going to play. I will be very surprised if we don't see him in a rotation role in some capacity. Just a question of how big.
And then briefly, Cohen Carr, he dunked some, took a couple threes, hit one of them. I don't know. He pretty much took the night off. He didn't play with a lot of energy. It's kind of hard to recognize him out there because out of his hair now, he cut most of his hair off.
Yeah.
But still amazing leaping. He had like 6 amazing almost dunks that were going off the back rim, which was frustrating him. But people just it's like a runway. They just part the ways to let him go and do his thing. It's kind of just fun, but
he's undergone the traditional Tom Izzo haircut, which doesn't get talked about so much anymore. But that used to be a thing, and it used to happen when guys came into the program immediately. Now we've gotten to the point that, guys maybe have a year like Cohen did where he kept it, and then all of a sudden it got. I saw a brief interview with him. He didn't mention that it was any at any behest of anybody on the staff, but I do sort of wonder that it will be different. It will definitely be different because it definitely added to Cohen's thing as a leaper. I think he's, again, I keep saying every name that comes up, I keep saying, this guy could be one of the more interesting names on the roster. And the conclusion you have to reach is more or less everybody is, because everybody is in something of a different role than they were a year ago. And you got a lot of names and a lot of potential for guys who could contribute. You just don't know how it's all going to sort out just yet. Cohen's another one. Look, we know he's going to play. I just think it's going to be interesting where he plays. And I just have this feeling that we see him a lot more at the 4 than we did last season.
I think there's very little question about that because I don't think his shooting's there yet. He had 1, 3, because I think you have to be better outside shooter than what he is right now at this point. And, but again,
it's funny because I saw him play a little bit in high school, and his senior year, I saw him a couple times. He was on television, and he hit threes in those games. And I'm not going to say he's on respite, but the form looked repeatable. Didn't look to me like there were any serious problems mechanically. I agree with you. He has to, if he's going to make good on all of his potential, that's an element that's got to come along, because there just isn't room in the game. Somebody like Brandon Dawson, who's a good comparison in some ways for Cohen, would struggle a little bit more now, I think, with the way the game has evolved. If you're a 6'6" guy who doesn't really shoot, it's harder. It's harder to get minutes. And so I do think Cohen needs that to happen. He needs that to come along. Not that he needs to be taking 5 of them a night, but it needs to be a credible threat. That said, it's not the biggest thing on his plate this year, in my opinion. I think he's got to show some improvement defensively in terms of his consistency, because that was lacking a year ago. I thought he had flashes in periods of time where he was solid, and then he would have breakdowns. That's got to change. I would like to see him be more consistently impactful as a rebounder, because I think he's got that in him. And then, to me, the biggest thing offensively, he has shown flashes of the ability not just to be a guy who scores in transition or off putbacks, but a guy who can face you up and get to the rim and finish in the half court. I think he has that in him. We need to see it more consistently. If he does those things, I can live without 3 for another year,
Yep. Well, and then they were going up against Fears and Akins. I'll just briefly say, because we're going to try and wrap up here in just a minute, but Akins looked just older, very mature, had a pretty good handle. He was able to attack the rim pretty well. Again, it's Moneyball, so you can't take too much away from it, except he looked comfortable dribbling the ball. I don't know how much that's going to translate into the season, because I think that's the one thing he needs to do better. I think we both agree that.
For sure.
Now. Yeah.
It's the biggest thing for him. We know he can shoot. We know he can defend. We know he can rebound. All those things are proven. It's, can he get to that next level offensively, which is going to mean, has his handle improved? Jim Comparoni at Spartan Mag has mentioned that he thinks it's real. And he talked to somebody on the coaching staff who confirmed that, no, what you're seeing at Moneyball is not a mirage. He's actually showing some improvement. And to your point, we got to see it in the games that count.
Yeah. And then Jeremy Fears, the question, of course, after the shooting back in around Christmas break, how would he be after his surgery and everything? And he is, I think I've seen reports that he says he's 95%. He's not appreciably any different than he was before the shooting, as far as I can tell. At least watching him move, jump, he could dunk, he could shoot. I don't, he wasn't like wowing me in any way with the shooting or anything, but he looked comfortable and moved just great. In every way. So I think the fears about Fears, I think it's going to be just a matter of how he develops the rest of his game. But I think he'll be completely fine, and he's got another year under his belt with the state. And he's got a year of eligibility back, so
absolutely.
They can theoretically have him for 4 years with the red shirt. So
of everybody we've talked about, he's the most important player on this team, in my opinion.
As with any Michigan State team, the point guard, right? It is pretty much, but especially him, I think.
Yeah, especially him, because he's a guy who, again, there are the questions. I think you're right. I think we're past it now with the physical stuff. It seems he's back.
Yeah.
But it's, what can he, if he's the guy I think he is, what kind of multiplier effect does that have on all the rest of these guys in helping them be better and more effective? Because I think he's got that in him, and that's something that Michigan State hasn't had for a while.
Yes.
So really important, to say the least.
I think that's true. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there. We'll obviously do our deep dive in Michigan State in a couple months after we do our Big Ten previews. We got a couple interviews coming up with some players, so we hope you stick around for those. Enjoy those. We'll talk to a couple journalists about the season, and I mean, with the 18 teams to get through, it's gonna take a while to get through all that. So it'll be a couple months of, we'll do our 2 days or 2 weeks as we get up to the season. Because I think the first official game is going to be November 7th against a whole waterfall taking on Niagara. So,
Yes.
and then a quick reminder again to our other sponsor of the show, the Christian Brothers Automotive Grand Rapids, 4 locations, $40 off an oil change. You mentioned Hoops when you go in to get your oil changed. That's a great deal. They also do rotate your tires and do a courtesy check. Any other sort of thing you need done with your car, they can take care of that as well. Again, if you want to find locations or the website, you can go to our support page. And also Nudge Printing, which is the best place to get your Spartan apparel. You can nudgeprinting.com, 20% off if you type in Final Four, just one word, into checkout to get all your stuff for tailgating coming up or whatever it is, anything you need with Spartan apparel. You can't go wrong with Nudge Printing. They are great stuff, great screen printed material. Our favorite, our family, as I say every time, you can't go wrong with Nudge Printing. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go